chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 4a. It can be found on page 1 of your pew Bibles. This lesson probably needs no introduction. This is the first account of creation in the book of Genesis. As I mentioned to the kids, there's another one that follows right after this, the story of Adam and Eve. This is the story of the 7 days of creation. Now, there's a source hypothesis that suggests that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, were written by 4 different sources: the Yahwist, the Elohist, the Deuteronomist, and the priestly sources, if you're interested. And those were all different sources written at different periods of time that were sort of squished together to make the Torah as we now know it. This text is one of those sources. This is from the priestly source, which is believed to have been written around the time that the Israelites were in exile in Babylon, and was intended to stress their relationship with God and God's presence during difficult times. So, again, a familiar story with you here in the first chapter. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it, and God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves of every kind, with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind, and God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things, and wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. May God's blessing be upon the hearing and the understanding of this holy word. It's striking to me that what may be one of the most influential texts in the creation of our faith doesn't actually exist in the Bible, at least not in its original form. Sometime around the 12th century BC, many scholars believe that a work called the Enuma Elish was written. This is the Babylonian myth of creation, and I'd like to share a little bit of it with you now. It says, "When on high the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name. When primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mumu Tiamat, she who bore them all, their waters mingled as a single body. No reed hut had sprung forth, no marshland had appeared. None of the gods had been brought into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies determined. Then it was that the gods were formed in the midst of heaven. Lamu and Lahamu were brought forth, by name they were called." After a lot of interplay then between the gods, including battles, exploits, and insults, the myth continues on in a fifth tablet, with one of the gods, Marduk, beginning the process of creation. He constructed stations for the great gods, fixing their astral likeness as the stars of the zodiac. He determined the year, and into sections he divided it. He set up 3 constellations for each of the 12 months. After defining the days of the year by means of heavenly figures, he founded the station of the pole star, Neberu, to determine their bounds, that none might err or go astray. Alongside he set up the stations of Enlil and Ea. Having opened up the gates on both sides, he strengthened the locks to the left and to the right. And then a familiar piece of creation from the 6th tablet. When Marduk heard the words of the gods, his heart prompted him to fashion artful works. Opening his mouth, he addressed Ea, to impart the plan he had conceived in his heart. "I will take blood and fashion bone. I will establish a savage. Man shall be his name. Truly savage man I will create. He shall be charged with the service of the gods, that they might be at ease. The ways of the gods I will artfully alter." Any of that sound familiar? The Enuma Elish is a long text, much longer than what we just read from the book of Genesis, even though that was pretty long. But interestingly, what it chronicles the gods creating should sound very familiar to us. Light, firmament, dry land, sun, moon, and stars, men and women, followed by a period of rest. That's exactly what was created in our Genesis story, as you just heard. And as you might have noticed, both creations occur in exactly the same order as well. Now, what's curious about these similarities is that most scholars date the Genesis account of creation to about the 6th century BC. That's some 600 years after the Babylonian myth was written. That also happens to be the exact same time that the Bible suggests that the Israelites were being held captive by, guess who? The Babylonians. This leads many scholars to believe that the creation story in Genesis was based in large part on the Enuma Elish, along with parallels from Sumerian, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian creation myths. Thus, it seems apparent that Israel participated in a culture with a very lively interest in this question of creation. But the question is why? Why would the Israelites feel the need to take the prevailing mythology of their captors and transform it into their own story? Well, as one author notes, it might be as simple as wanting to challenge the pretensions of that mythology. For although those creation stories mirror one another, there's one remarkable difference between the two, and that's the number of gods. In the brief sections that we read this morning from the Enuma Elish, there were a whole host of gods mentioned, and trust me, there were many more in the parts that we didn't read. But in the Genesis story, how many gods were mentioned? Just one. It's as if the people of Israel were saying, we're not interested in debating how the world came to be. The details of that we don't care about. What we want to stress is that this wasn't the result of a whole host of gods. This was the result of one God, our God, the God who is with us in captivity and will be with us wherever we go, the God who is more powerful than all of your gods. And so instead of chronicling tales of the gods trying to kill one another like the Enuma Elish does, the Israelites' account simply stresses that God created the world, plants, animals, humans, everything, and called all of it good. Now this is significant because, as one source suggests, these creation mythologies always answer at least 4 of the following questions. Who is God? What is the nature of the world? What is the relationship between God and the world? And who are we? And so this Genesis account seems to state explicitly that God is the creator of the world and that God loves humans. Not only that, but God's specialty is loving and caring for creation. Now this is interesting for us to consider here on Trinity Sunday. The Trinity, as you well know, refers to a way in which the church has sought to name its experience of God over the years. Recognizing that God has reached out to connect with the world in many ways, as God the Creator, as Jesus the man who walked on this earth, and as the Spirit which we believe is with us now, the Trinity was developed to show that God interacts with the world in many ways. But that was the creation of the church. The Bible doesn't begin with the Trinity. Although people will try to read the Trinity into this Genesis text, the fact of the matter is that even though we experience God in many ways, many more than the 3 named in the Trinity, I would argue, the text that we read here this morning focuses on only one of those experiences, and that's God as creator. And it does so to show us that according to this creation story, we are beings who were created by God in God's image and tasked with loving the creation in the same way that God loves us. That's a far different message from the Enuma Elish, which seems to suggest that humans were created to be servants of a pantheon of deities. And remember that this is the story that those who selected the canon of scriptures that became our Bible chose to begin with. They chose to begin not with 1, but 2 creation stories, the first of which declares that God created everything and called it good. And as one author helpfully notes, this is something to pay attention to, because where you begin in theology determines where you end up. Let me say that again. Where you begin in theology determines where you end up. Today we're saying that we begin with a God who created us in love so that we might go forth and have dominion over, which is simply another way of saying to love and care for, not subdue and plunder, that we might have dominion over the world. It is from this point that our theology must begin. Created in love to love the created world. And as I look back over the time that we have spent here together, I think more often than not, that is where our work has begun. Think of all that we have done together over the past 11 years that celebrates the fact that we were created in love to love all that God has created. That open and affirming declaration, which states that we acknowledge and affirm the equal value of people of all ages, races, nationalities, ethnicities, cultures, sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions, regardless of physical, mental, or emotional abilities, family structures, faith backgrounds, or socioeconomic status. And we have lived out accepting all people into the full life and ministry of this church, regardless of where they find themselves on this journey of life. Created in love to love creation. We have donated time, talent, and treasure to make sure that our brothers and sisters here in Kittery and as far away as Honduras have enough food to eat. Through weekly donations to and volunteer time at Footprints Food Pantry, peanut butter collecting and backpack packing for N68 Hours of Hunger, donations to shared gardens, and filling real and virtual buckets full of food. Created in love to love creation. We've put our bodies to work as well. A group of us traveled to Florida with other members of the York Association to do some work repairing homes damaged by hurricanes. That led to 2 trips from this church to New Orleans to work in the wake of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, to tear down damaged homes and to rebuild new ones. We also worked with Habitat for Humanity down the street here in York and on houses of our own church members. Created in love to love creation. For those concerns that could not be helped with a hammer and nails, we sent prayers upon prayers for Sandy Hook Elementary School, and horrendously for the 74 communities that have experienced a shooting since, including Seattle, Washington, and Troutdale, Oregon in the past 2 weeks. For Superstorm Sandy, the tsunami in Southeast Asia, the situation in the Middle East, the earthquake in Haiti, and so many more. Created in love to love creation. We took a fledgling church school and turned it into the place for Protestant Christian education here in town, reaching out and welcoming families who had been away for a while and those who had never been to church before. We have shown our children what it means to live lives in which we seek to share God's love with the world in all that we say and do. Created in love to love creation. We've greened our congregation, earning us a status as one of only 2 Green Globe congregations in Maine by recycling, engaging in energy-saving efforts, and being smart about the footprint that our church is leaving on the environment. Created in love to love creation. And we've reached out to each other. When one of us is in need or in pain or experiencing grief, the phone calls, meals, cards, and prayers sent are overwhelming. We know what it means to reach out to those in need. Created in love to love creation. We could go on and on here this morning. The point is simply to say that we've done a lot of good work here as a church because we've understood that we need to start in love. Instead of starting with trying to convert sinners or changing people's faith leanings or by espousing some exclusivist theology or preaching our own agendas that have nothing to do with God's message as some churches are wont to do, we began instead with love, and I think the results speak for themselves. My friends, my hope and my prayer for you is that you don't lose sight of this. There are lots of new beginnings ahead for this congregation. An interim minister will be here before the summer ends. A 4th century of ministry will begin this fall. Then a new settled minister will begin perhaps in late 2015. There are lots of exciting new challenges and new beginnings ahead. Through it all, don't allow the changes and the challenges to make you lose sight of where so much of what we have done together began. In love. Our theology must begin with the God who created us in love to go forth and love the world. Because if we begin there, no matter what lies ahead, I can guarantee that God will look at what's happening and declare that it is very good indeed. Amen. Our final hymn can be